All right, good morning. It is November 16th. This is the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. This is our weekly meeting. We're attending this virtually. We will start with a roll call of commissioners.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Here.
Commissioner Bogue.
Here.
Commissioner Cross.
Present.
Commissioner McGowan.
Here.
Commissioner Mesner.
Here.
Commissioner Oath. Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 6 out of 7 commissioners present.
Good. Great to see everybody. Good morning. The next part of our agenda is commissioner comments. Does any commissioner have comments for us before we move into other areas of the agenda? Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just an update to the commission that I had an opportunity yesterday to present at the town hall to Club 20 about our completed rulemakings and just an update on permitting in the state. And I think it was well received, well attended, and I appreciate the opportunity to present to them. I'll also be presenting to CCI at their winter conference coming up in a few weeks. So
Fantastic. Thanks for the good outreach. Really appreciate that. Anything else? All right, seeing none, we will move to the director update. I believe we do have an update from Director Murphy this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners and folks listening in. I wanted to take a quick update. We're 16 days past the first deadline for financial assurance plans to have been submitted, and wanted to give a quick overview of where we are in that process. I know it's been a very important issue across the state of Colorado and to a diverse set of stakeholders. Putting together the forms took longer than staff had anticipated. We had some staffing challenges that were unforeseeable, but the good news is we have a form and it appears to be working successfully. We've had the operators with the highest number of wells submit plans. That due date was November 1st for operators of 50 or more wells. And as we've gotten the form launched, the next phase of this is to create a system in which the public can also view a form that's in process. That wasn't able to be completed in advance of the deadline, and we thought that getting plans in was of utmost importance so that staff and commission can begin reviewing them. So as a quick reminder about the financial plan deadlines, November 1st was the deadline for operators of 50 or more wells. December 1st for operators between 10 and 50, and a third deadline on February 1st for operators of 10 or fewer wells. As the November 1st deadline has passed, we received 41 initial financial assurance plans for operators in and above the 50 well mark. Of those, a number of those plans encompass subsidiary companies, so it actually covers a larger number of operators than that number would reflect. We did actually receive 14 filings early from group 2 and 3 operators, which is really exceptional. We did have a couple of operators in that 15 above operator or category that did not file. A number of those are kind of either in the process for an enforcement through a bond claim, or we need to have a follow-up conversation and some decision making around it. But on balance, I think we had really excellent compliance on as of November, for that November 1st deadline. We had 12 option 1 plans, 7 option 2 plans of the group 1 operators, 11 option 3 plans, 2 option 4, 5 option 5, and 4 option 6. And 5 and 6, if you recall, are the there must be a commission decision on them. So we're looking at least 9 hearings. Option 1 and 2, unless there's a disagreement with staff, those are pretty straightforward and administrative to review. I will be undertaking that review and trying to move those plans through in the next couple of weeks. Again, our goal here is to get folks into compliance with the new rules. And then in the option 3 and 4 categories, if you remember, those are kind of a pay over time model. And there are a couple of different ways where either the director loses discretion to make the decision based on the operator's requests, or if the operator and the director see the plans differently, it may come to you. So, as we're looking at it, we're thinking in a few months, Q1 of calendar year 23, I would expect to begin commission hearings on financial assurance plans to the extent those are necessary. And also to have an external viewer available for plans that are in process. I think we all need to remember that this is going to be an ongoing review and ongoing process. It was contemplated in the rules that staff is continually, at least annually, and also if there are other events looking at financial assurance plans. So this is stage gate one of an ongoing iterative evergreen, depending on which of those words you prefer, process. So it's really exciting. It's really dynamic. And I appreciate the operators who have timely filed, and a shout out to the 14 who filed early, in fact. So with that, I really wanted to just daylight where we are in this process. I know, as I said at the beginning, it's been an important process. It's been really important to get the form right to make the process smoother for everybody. And it's also been a really excellent opportunity to line data up in our system and with operators. So that's my update for now. I'd be happy to provide a similar update after the December 1st deadline, once we, have a week or two to make sure we understand what the data says. And more to come on it. I also anticipate trying to get some of those option 1 and 2 plans approved, even in the coming weeks. So that's, because I think that's how those plans operate, and we should be in a good place to do it. 3 and 4 may take a little more time depending on what the operator has requested. So that's a long-winded, I believe, update on financial assurance plans. I'm happy to take questions, and I really appreciate the opportunity to provide an update as to where we are.
Great. Thank you, Director Murphy. Do commissioners have questions? All right, we're seeing no question. We look forward to continuing the dialogue and getting updates, and thankful to operators for their work here, and really thankful to your staff. I know staff is very much has full plates, and this is yet another serving on some of your team's plates, and we appreciate the work they're doing there.
Couldn't agree more.
All right, we will move to consent agenda. Does any commissioner have questions with regard to consent? Seeing no questions, do we have a motion to approve consent?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Cross, second from Commissioner Messner. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda carries. With that, we will move to our first agenda, OGDP docket 2205-00103. This is a Verdad Resources docket. And so we see that we have Mr. Pershella with us. Good morning. Do you have folks on your team that you need to get ready? And Hearings Manager Larson, I also note that perhaps Jason Maxey is going to speak to this one. And normally we would hear from him first if he's with us.
And Mr. Pershala can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Mr. Maxey's not speaking on this one. Is that correct?
I did not see him on the agenda.
Okay. Chair Robbins, my understanding is that we will hear from Mr. Maxey on another OGDP later this morning. And this OGDP, I believe, the relevant local government was the city of Greeley, not Weld County.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's strange. That's what I thought too, but I'm just reading my agenda and it had Jason Maxey on it. So
Apologies.
perhaps the agenda is incorrect.
Well, we have Mr. Maxey here. Give us one moment.
Good morning, Mr.
Morning.
Maxey. Do you want to talk or not?
That's a loaded question, Chair Robbins. I mean, given the opportunity, I always love talking. No, my apologies. I thought that this one was the one that I was on the agenda for, and I'm looking at the agenda now, and it looks like I am. The other two items on the agenda. Even though the next one, it says Weld County, that one is actually in Greeley, so I will not be talking about that since that's within the municipal boundaries of Greeley.
My apologies, Mr. Maxey. I overlooked you on the agenda there.
That's okay. It's easy to do. No worries.
Well, we're happy to hear from you. Go ahead.
All right. Well, just a few quick comments here. As what we've kind of become accustomed to, thank you as always, Chair Robbins and the rest of the commissioners for allowing me just a few minutes to come before you, speak just at a very high level about the Weld County process and where we are at with this item that's on the docket before you. And as always, be happy to answer any questions that the commission may have regarding the Weld County process and look into any other items that might need to be addressed that you all might have questions on. We did submit comments as normal through the 2A process. We filed those online and submitted those back in September of this year, September 22nd. We have already heard this case and it has been approved through the Weld County process. Going back about a year ago to September of 2021, we held a pre-app meeting for this location, as was our process for the majority of 2021, even going back into 2020. As you all know, we've been having pre-app meetings. And I'm happy to say that we had full participation at this meeting, as again, we've become accustomed to, and we again greatly appreciate the COGCC staff, among others, for being a part of that. It's critical to the robust process of both of our permitting processes and having a robust dialogue regarding alternate siting and any other questions that might come up, and it's integral to the planning process for the applicant. So along with Weld County staff and COGCC staff, of course, Verdad was in attendance as well. CPW was in attendance also. Verdad did submit their 1041 application to the Weld County Oil and Gas Department in May of 2022. And the application included an analysis of multiple alternate sites, which were reviewed and discussed in detail with the oil and gas staff, along with the hearing officer. As you all know, we do send referral requests out to multiple agencies. Those were sent out in July of this year. We did receive a lot of responses back, including the COGCC, so thank you again for that response. The only response we did not receive was from the Hudson Fire Protection District. However, again, we do have a emergency action plan executed for this location, so that is good to go for our permitting process. We did receive, in fact, 0 applications for intervention, so that's a good thing as well. We held our hearing on September 1st of this year, so just a couple months ago at this point, we held this hearing. Considered testimony from the hearing officer, considered testimony, excuse me, from not only staff, but also the applicant, and found there was one item that was a little bit insufficient in order to render a decision that day on September 1st. Basically, we didn't have enough information for our preliminary drainage report. And so we were not able to finalize that hearing on September 1st. It was continued to September 29th. But at the conclusion of the September 29th hearing, the hearing officer found that the application was complete and compliant with all requirements. So the applicant was able to turn in their preliminary drainage information to our staff. It was reviewed, it was found to be compliant. A final order was issued, and that's been recorded with our clerk and recorder. And then it was final noticed in the Greeley Tribune in mid-October. From a land use perspective, Weld County believes this is a good location. It is close to other oil and gas development. It's not immediately adjacent, but it is close to other development. So it kind of lends itself to some cumulative impacts and that type of discussion. We would support approval of the COGCC looking at approving this permit. And just a quick item to note on this one, I always like pulling up anything that might be a little bit different or interesting about these cases when we see them, but just so that the COGCC knows, the surface owner was actually in attendance at this hearing and simply to observe the process. And I always encourage that. I appreciate people who want to educate themselves on the Weld County process and come and view our hearings, whether that's remote or whether that's in person. But in this case here, the surface owner attended in person. I was happy to see her there, was able to chat with her for a few minutes after the hearing, answer some basic questions regarding oil and gas development in Weld County and the process after our hearing. So I encouraged them to be aware of when this would be before you all. So I'm not sure if they're listening today or not, but regardless, it's always good to have that input there and to have interested landowners see what the permitting process is about. So I just wanted you all to know that they were in attendance and we had a good conversation after our hearing. So with that all being said, it's pretty high level, pretty brief. There wasn't really too many interesting facts about this one. It was pretty straightforward from Weld County's side. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that the commission might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have questions? All right, seeing none, do appreciate the local government perspective. Always appreciate having you to provide that perspective on each individual application that we hear. So thanks again, Mr. Maxey, for being with us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
All right, we do not have any public comment on this matter. So at this point, we would turn to Verdad and its council for its presentation.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, commissioners. I think we have everyone on here. I see Heather is on, Mike, and let me just check. I don't see Jeff Berghorn, our landman, but Heather will be doing the presentation. So I think we can go ahead and get started. And if Jeff joins, we can add him to the panel. As you know, my name is Joe Pershala with Wellborn, Sullivan, Meck and Tooley, and I am appearing on behalf of the applicant Verdad Resources. With me here today are Heather Mitchell, Verdad's regulatory manager, Mike Cugnetti, director of EHS&R, and Mr. Berghorn, excuse me, and he's a landman. Verdad requests that the commission approve the Harambe 2920 oil and gas development plan, which covers approximately 1,930 acres in Township 2 North, Range 64 West in Weld County. And more specifically, it includes 2 surface locations. One of which is a prior approved and built oil and gas location. That is the Georgine 2828-2833 pad. It's location ID 473534. That is located in the southeast quarter of section 28, which is inside the mineral development area. This pad is already approved for 8 horizontal wells, and it would develop approximately 960 acres of the proposed drilling and spacing unit that comprises the mineral development lands. The other location is a proposed location. It's the Harambe 2920 pad. It would be approximately 10 acres of new disturbance, and that's within the southwest quarter of the northeast quarter, and then also bleeds over to the southeast quarter, the northwest quarter of section 32, and that's sited outside the mineral development area. This pad would have 14 horizontal wells to develop the remaining 960 acre portion of the drilling and spacing unit that comprises the mineral development lands. The aforementioned oil and gas locations will be used to develop an approximate 1,920 acre drilling and spacing unit, and that covers the west half of section 20, the south half of section 28, and all of sections 29 and 30. And Verdad is proposing to drill a total of 17 horizontal wells within the unit, and again, 8 from the approved Georgine pad and 9 from the proposed Harambe pad. Verdad does have 45% of the leasehold in the proposed DSU and is an owner with the right to drill and produce. The Harambe location is on fee surface in rural part of unincorporated Weld County. It does meet the criteria of Rule 304 B2B subpart 2, as it is within 2,000 feet of one residential building unit owner. And it's approximately 1,769 feet away from the location. Verdad in its presentation will speak to this, its efforts to contact the resident to obtain informed consent, and the best management practices that it intends to use to mitigate any adverse impacts to that owner. Verdad has submitted an alternative location analysis, which demonstrates the efficacy of the Harambe pad, and it does have a surface use agreement with the surface owner and has met with that owner regarding the siting of the location. As you heard from Mr. Maxey, Weld County is the relevant local government and has approved that Harambe location. There are no proximate local governments. Verdad is not requesting a variance. It has given proper notice pursuant to rules 303E and 504. No petitions or interventions have been received. On November 8th, 2022, the director issued her recommendation, which does recommend approval of Verdad's application. So with that, I would say that the application satisfies the Conservation Act and Commission rules, and we respectfully request that the Commission adopt the director's recommendation and approve this application. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Mitchell, who will provide an overview of the oil and gas development plan, and Mr. Cugnetti and Berghorn are also available for questions. Thank you.
Oops. I'm going to start sharing my screen now. Is it showing my screen?
It is showing the
but it's
screen.
Is it
not
empty?
in presentation view.
Got it. 1 second. Oh, it's showing the wrong screen again. 1 second. This happened last time too. Okay. There we go. Presentation view now?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. All right. Good morning. I'm Heather Mitchell. I'm the regulatory manager for Verdad Resources. And I'm going to talk today about our Harambe 2920 OGDP application. This first slide orients you to our location, the location of the unit, as well as the proposed pad within Weld County. You can see that I-76 runs through the unit. We are just east of Hudson, about a half mile, and we're also west of Keensburg. This particular location, as far as ALA criteria goes, we have one residential building unit to the north, 1,769 feet. Other human receptors in this area, we do not have any schools, high occupancy building units, or designated outside activity areas for 3 miles. Our nearest disproportionately impacted community is 9 miles to the south. This location is not on a high priority habitat. The pad is not in a floodplain. There's no surface water supply areas or type 3 aquifers or goody wells in this particular location. And we're not immediately up gradient of any wetlands or riparian corridors. We do have an SUA for this location, and we will be using 604B3 siting requirements for this location. This slide gives an overview of some of the locations that we looked at, and the little black diamonds are basically they're RBUs, and they're buffered out with the 2,000-foot radius to kind of give an idea of how densely populated this area is. We also have I-76 in white. The water bodies are buffered out in blue. We have floodplain that's in teal and a no surface occupancy for aquatic sports water to the south of our proposed pad location. And then just as an FYI, I'm going to put on my little pointer. This is the Georgine location. This is an existing pad. It is built. It will be developing the north half of section 28 and all of section 33 with 8 wells. So the alternative location analysis is for our second location for this kind of large and awkward shaped unit. And you can see there's not a lot of open spaces without RBUs, and also that we're just developing the west half of section 20. So with that, as far as options on the north side, just because of the awkwardness of the unit, drilling from the north would either require more wells, long reaches, subsurface easements, just a lot of more time with back builds and things like that. So our best options were going to be on the south end of the pad, where we could drill the longer 2-mile laterals as well as the shorter laterals, all going in the same direction pretty efficiently. So our primary options are going to be on the south end. And we did have an SUA here on option A, an existing SUA, but as you can see, it's in Hudson. It's in a floodplain. It's actually pretty close to RBUs there too. So that wasn't a good option. Another option we have is our existing Jackson pad. That pad is due to its proximity to water and the road, it can't really be expanded, and it's also pretty close to RBUs. Our option B here is this surface owner. It would be a great option for us as far as drilling efficiently, that we wouldn't have any long reaches and we'd be able to drill the short and the long laterals pretty easily. But that surface owner has other plans for that area and they would not grant us an SUA. So we moved down south a little bit further into section 32. In section 32, we thought we found kind of a unicorn pad in that in this area, we were greater than 2,000 feet from any residential building units. We were outside of the mapped NSO buffer. But when we went to our Weld County meeting and CPW was there, they asked that we survey in, field verify the ordinary high water mark to make sure that we were 500 feet off of that. So that buffer was actually not just mapped, but field verified. And when we did field verify it, it required us to move our pad to the north, about 250 feet or so, and it brought in that residential building unit to the north. We still felt like this was our best location operationally, and we were still sited farther away than any other location from residential building units. And then just as an FYI, the Georgine pad is too far away for us to develop the whole unit, and it also it's also not big enough to get more wells on there. So we weren't able to use that. The next slide zooms in a little bit closer, 2,000 feet around our proposed location. The little green triangles, this is our residential building unit to the north. They're just north of Weld County Road 16. And just as further information, we'll be coming in from the east, so our traffic won't be passing that residential building unit as we're coming to the location. Again, like we mentioned, this particular pad is a good location to drill out both the short and the long laterals. We'll be able to use some of this existing road to attach onto and get to our pad location. You can see that we're outside of the NSO buffer and our pad is outside of the floodplain. We're near existing infrastructure and we're able to get 10 full acres for this pad, and we have a signed SUA. Zooming in a little closer is our facility layout. And as we reached out a number of times to the residential building unit to the north, we sent several letters. They're not listed. We went to their house. We never received any responses to them. So in lieu of informed consent, we're choosing to use 604B, which you can see that our wellheads and our production equipment are all located greater than 2,000 feet away from the residential building unit as one primary protection for that that building. We'll also have sound walls on all four sides of the pad. We'll be using a quiet frac crew. Our lighting thresholds are under the requirements per Weld County. We are connecting to an oil line to reduce truck traffic and tank emissions. We also will have a lay flat pipeline for completion operations to further reduce truck traffic. We have SCADA monitoring and remote shut-in capability for this location. Just some benefits that we like to list of this location. It's a pretty big unit. We'll be able to drill it out with just 2 pads. We are connecting to an oil line, and that oil connection actually goes to the Georgine as well. So we'll be able to reduce the number of tanks on the Georgine from the original permit. And then we also have some offset well remediation that will be part of both of these operations. There's 2 drilled and abandoned or plugged and abandoned wells on these 2 locations that will be remediated, as well as it looks like 2 to 3 right now, producing vertical wells that may be plugged as part of this after they get a good look into those wells. These next 2 slides, they just go over our best management practices. All of them are pretty standard across Verdot operations. They're all found in our cumulative impacts plan, but some to call out for this particular location. We'll be using DB22 base fluid to reduce odor. We have an oil line and a temporary water line to reduce truck traffic. There'll be no permanent lighting on the production facility, and we'll have sound walls on all 4 sides. And we were able to site away from any water Just some more, this particular pad is designed for detention per Weld County. We have robust inspection protocols, remote shut-in capabilities for this area. We will have gas and oil takeaway at the time of production. And we're currently working on a solution for a water connection. That is not in place yet, but we're working towards it at this time, but we don't have it right now. And that is, let's see, no, I have one more slide. And then just of note on the timing of this, we did start it about a year ago. And then we submitted our applications in May, as Jason and Maxie mentioned. And we did have one continuance, also to receive a floodplain permit for the road, which we did get. So that was approved. And I think of note on the timing is that this has run pretty concurrently with the Weld County process. We received, the order was published last month. And we are here at our hearing today, and we received our director recommendation on the 8th. So last week. That's all I have for you today. I appreciate your time and your review of our application. And I have Mike Cuccinetti, the director of EHS&R, as well as Jeff Berghorn, our land manager, here to assist with any questions. Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And thank you to the panel for the presentation. At this time, we would see if commissioners have questions for the panel. Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. I appreciate the presentation as well. And just one point of clarification and then a couple of questions. Ms. Mitchell, I may have misheard, but you talked about the access road there and it's coming in from the west. Is that correct?
Yes.
There along the floodplain as mapped on the picture?
Yes. Did I say?
Okay, I thought I might have.
No, I think I said it wrong. You're right.
Wanted to clarify that. Thank you. And you mentioned oil pipeline hookups to both sites. I just wanted to clarify the timing of those. Is Verdad committing to have those pipelines takeaways hooked up prior to production?
Yes, for gas and oil.
Great, thank you so much. Also, I understand that you moved the pad because of the HPH buffer zone, and that did put it within 2,000 feet of the RBU there. And I wonder if you could elaborate on outreach to that RBU owner and how those communications have gone and what their stance is on that. And I believe the material said that your intent was to place all equipment outside of the 2,000-foot buffer, and wonder if you could confirm that as well.
Yes, we reached out to the RBU owner a number of times via letter, certified letter, FedEx letters. They are not listed, so we weren't able to call. I know Jeff did try to visit their home. They've been unresponsive to us. They've also been notified as part of this process at least 4 times as well, as a notice of application for each, the WOGLA and the OGDP, as well as when we were approved. So they've received upwards of 8 notices from us. We did try to visit them, but they're just not responding. So we were able to, in lieu of that, move all the wellheads and equipment greater than 2,000 feet away from them. And that can be confirmed too, yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Ms. Mitchell. So just to confirm, multiple attempts to reach out to the landowner and no response to Verdad. I don't know if Mr. Maxey is with us still, but wanted to confirm that if Weld County had had any communications with them or from them as well.
Mr. Maxey?
Yes, thank you for the question, Commissioner Ackerman, and glad I was still hanging on here for a minute to hear that question and be able to give Weld County's response. Direct response to that question is no, we have not had anybody reach out to us regarding this location from the location you're questioning from that property owner.
Thank you, Mr. Maxey. Appreciate that. And then, Ms. Mitchell, my final question, can you talk a little bit about the origin of the name of this pad? It raised my eyebrows. I wanted to to hear a little bit about why you decided on this name for this pad.
Honestly, I don't know who, I don't know. They just named them. So it's just given the name. I'm not sure the origin.
Thanks. I did want to just make a comment on that. I appreciate that. And I was afraid that might be the case, that people might not have heard of this name before. As the Environmental and Wildlife Commissioner, Harambe is the name of a gorilla that was controversially shot in 2016 in the Cincinnati Zoo, which ended up being a significant event in the environmental community and really in public consciousness. And so I was concerned about using that name for this purpose. I found it to be a little bit distasteful. Would be interested if anyone in the company, considered that and talked about it and continued forward with that name, or if it was just moving forward with that name because it was suggested.
I just moved forward with the name that was suggested. I didn't know the context of that. So
Thanks. I haven't heard that name used anywhere else, and so I'm just supposing that's where it came from. I just wanted to make a general comment to Verdad and all operators that might be listening to be very careful about naming of pads. I know that there are a lot of pads out there, and we have to come up with many, many names for those pads. I've seen a couple named after wildlife before as well, and I do think that it's a controversial and emotional topic for many of our constituents. And so I would ask you to be very careful about name selection as well. And this one, I honestly, I find it distasteful enough that you prefer that another name was used, but I don't know if there's a significant enough process that we're too far down the road to change the name of the pad at this point. But perhaps staff can help me answer that question, Mr. Chair.
I don't think so. I don't think it's a big process. I don't think it's a process to change it. I think we can change it. I mean, there's updates to paperwork, but we can change it.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Ms. Mitchell. And when it's appropriate, Mr. Chair, I would be interested in hearing from staff to see if that throws too much of a wrench in the works. That's all I have.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman. Other commissioners with questions? Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation, and thank you to Commissioner Ackerman. I had no idea, and I think it's good that we all pay attention to those details. Sometimes the words we use are important. I was wondering if, one, I just wanted to clarify, I saw in the BMP's language that I'm familiar with around high ozone days, but it wasn't labeled as BMPs for high ozone days. So I just wanted to make sure that that's what that language was related to.
I'm sorry. I know we added the BMP. I felt we added the BMP to the cumulative impacts plan, so we wouldn't have to add it after the fact this time. But
Yep.
Yes, we are intending to do those. Yes.
Great, thank you. And then I guess maybe I missed that you all potentially would be plugging 2 to 3, I think vertical wells is what you just said in the presentation.
So that is part of offset well remediation. That is an overview of both of these plans. We go through preliminarily how many wells will need to be remediated as part of this for offset frac policies. And in that I want to say there are 2 or 3 existing vertical wells that will potentially be plugged. I think the other operator has to look at those and decide if they'll be plugged, but it's possible that they will be removed from the books and they have associated equipment and pads.
Okay, great. Sorry, if that was in the cumulative impacts report or the Form 2B, I missed it. My apologies.
No worries.
I'm wondering if you all would be open to, if and when you find out how many wells get plugged, sharing that number with our staff, the estimated emissions savings and vehicle miles traveled and land reclaimed from those plugging and abandonment activities.
Yep, and I believe on our last OGDP, we had a similar situation, and I think we put a condition on that we would submit some sundries once we knew exactly what was actually plugged with it and do that. It's with another operator, but we can work with that operator, so.
Great, thank you. So I would be interested in adding similar language to this application as well. Thank you, that's all I have.
Commissioner Cross?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Also, thank you, Commissioner Ackerman, for bringing that up. That was going to be one of my questions as well. And I'll admit I came from it from a slightly different angle. I wasn't sure if it was named in remembrance of Harambe or what it was, but I do appreciate that it at least is a controversial topic. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I just had a couple questions that I wanted to go over, and admittedly, Commissioner McGowan went into some of my questions on the offset remediation. So thank you, Commissioner McGowan, for that. With respect to the produced water and oil takeaway, and I know that those are being planned, are those going to follow the same right of way?
It's a third party. Well, it's a third party on the oil and the gas. And so I'm not sure which right of ways they're going to be taking. And then we haven't worked out all the details on the water. So obviously, if we'd try to use the same right of ways if possible, but if that's up to the third party who does those.
Okay, yeah, and I just wanted to double check that because I was hoping it would be in the same, because that would obviously reduce surface disturbance, but just wanted to double check. And I believe I remember seeing that the gas infrastructure would be set up if their flowbacks are in saleable quantities. Is that correct, or are you 100% committing to the gas?
We're committed to the gas. We have to have the gas in order to produce because we are not allowed to flare. There is a small period before it reaches saleable quantities that it can't go into the line because there's not enough. So that's a very small period in which we have a little bit of flaring. It's intermittent and it's just until there's enough to go into the line.
Okay. And then the other question that I wanted to talk about was, during the alternative location analysis discussion, you mentioned that you didn't want to go from the north because you would have to talk about potential subsurface easements, et cetera. Did you have any of those discussions with anyone from the north for that east section of, I believe it was section 20?
I don't believe we looked into the line. Are you talking about actually going into like surface use stuff?
Subsurface.
Subsurface easement. I don't believe we had any conversations related to subsurface easement because we just, those are very long reaches, kind of not developing acreage. So I don't believe we did.
Okay. And you said to the north there was also RVUs that would be
there. Yeah, it's pretty populated all around. Yeah.
Okay. In terms of questions, that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Cross. Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I actually had that as a question too, and I'm wondering, sorry, can you re-clarify why you're not developing the east side of section 20? It is an odd shape, and it looks to me like the location that you have on the west side is reaching all the way through, but not on the east side.
That's correct. And I believe that's just on account of our mineral acreage. And Jeff, do you have that answer? That's probably just, we just don't have that mineral acreage there.
Yeah, this is Jeff Berghorn. I can comment on that. The east half of section 20 is already developed by another operator. So there's existing laterals there.
Further questions for the panel? Ms. Trask, are you here to talk to us about name changing and difficulty or lack of difficulty therein?
Good morning, Chair. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay. Yeah, and thank you for the question and the prompt, Commissioner Ackerman. There are a couple of options for changing the name. If Verdad wants to, or if the commission wants to order a name change, we could do it today during the hearing as part of the commission's order. And staff could If Verdad had a name they wanted to use, we could actually go into the Form 2A and change it in the Form 2A before we approve the Form 2A. The other option is through Rule 301C, which is changes to an approved oil and gas development plan. So we do have a process built in within our rules to accommodate a change. In this particular case, the applicant would just submit a Form 4 sundry requesting the name change. That sundry would be posted to our website for 14 days. We would approve the sundry with a COA that says now you will submit a sundry for the location to actually affect that change within our database. So there's a couple different options that staff is happy to accommodate based on the commission's request today.
I would guess that the applicant is probably not have a new name in mind yet.
I don't have a new name in mind, but we'll get one. We'll find a more appropriate name and we will get a sundry filed. It's that, I don't see that being a problem. We haven't filed any permits, so we'll get a new name.
Commissioner Ackerman, is that satisfactory?
It sure is, and thank you. And I just wanted to say how much I appreciate you making that accommodation, and something that I see as a pretty innocent error, and really appreciate your willingness to move to a different name on that. Thank you.
Of course.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Trask. Any final questions? Seeing none, do we have a motion? Commissioner Ackerman?
I'll move for approval. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Cross?
I would just modify that to add the condition that was brought up by Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you. I was just too slow on the uptake there, Mr. Chair. I agree with that addition.
Okay. And then Commissioner Ackerman, I mean, we've been talking about it, but do you want your motion to include direction to applicant to file a Form 4 for a name change away from the current name?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So that motion has now been amended twice. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Cross. Motion from Commissioner Ackerman. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, all this, I see some discussion. Commissioner Cross.
Yeah, I just want, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to quickly say that overall, I think that this is a great example of our rules working in the correct way. I appreciate the fact that, as Ms. Mitchell said, they thought they had found a unicorn pad away from all receptors, worked with CPDW to determine that there might be additional factors, moved it, and then even within the movement of the location, still adjusted the pad design to make sure that it would not have the impacts on the surface or the RBU nearby. And so I appreciate the fact that the willingness of the operator here to kind of go through these steps and work with our regulations here. And overall, I think it's very good. So
Great. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you to the panel for the presentation. The application has been approved with 2 conditions.
Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners.
All right. Commissioners, why don't we take, let's just take a quick 5 minutes and that'll get the next panel set up. And then we'll return. It's 9:48. Let's return it, or 9:49. Let's return it at 9:54. Let's see. So we now are taking up docket 2205001111. This is the North Core Oil and Gas Development Plan. And I would note for the record that we did receive a written public comment from Michael Franke, a planner with the city of Greeley, in favor, I believe, of this proposed OGDP. We do not have any others that have signed up for public comment. And so at this point, we will hear from the panel.
Thank you, Chair Robbins and commissioners. We're going to start sharing a PowerPoint. So if you could give us just one moment. We'll get this pulled up. Wonderful. All right, and Miss Larson, I believe we're only missing Joseph Reimer, if you don't mind adding him to the panel. But I will get started. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Kelsey Waselinki with Jost Energy Law. And with Jamie Jost, we represent Kerr-McGee in the North Core OGDP before you today in docket 2205001111. I'd like to thank the city of Greeley, which is the relevant local government for the locations proposed in this OGDP, for their participation through the USR process and the comments they submitted in support of this OGDP. And we'd also like to thank COGCC staff for their efforts on this OGDP. Next slide, please. I'll take just a few minutes to summarize the North Core OGDP and requested relief before I turn it over to the Kerr-McGee team. The North Core OGDP is located within the city of Greeley, and the city of Greeley approved the USR permits for the Rainbow and Blue Chip locations on October 25th, 2022. The OGDP requests that the commission establish 2 drilling and spacing units to develop a total of 4,160 acres of minerals from 40 proposed horizontal wells in the Sharon Springs, Niobrara, Fort Hays, Codell, and Carlisle formations. The North Core OGDP also requests that the commission approve 2 new oil and gas locations, the Rainbow 24-9HZ pad for 28 wells, and the Blue Chip 622HZ pad for 12 wells. This OGDP does not trigger any Rule 304 ALA criteria, and specifically both locations are over 2,000 feet from residential building units and high occupancy building units, over 2,000 feet from all schools and childcare centers, and not within any high priority habitat. As part of the North Core OGDP, Kerr-McGee has committed to plugging and reclaiming 27 wells within 1 year of all new wells turning on to production and decommissioning 10 facilities. Kerr-McGee will describe the associated emissions reductions in the presentation today. And finally, Kerr-McGee has complied with all notice requirements for the North Core OGDP. No formal petitions were filed, and during the public comment period, Kerr-McGee received a total of 5 comments, all of which were in support of the OGDP. And these included comments from the City of Greeley staff and a mineral owner within the mineral development lands. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Sam Samet, a senior regulatory analyst with Kerr-McGee, to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Mrs. Waselinki. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Sam Samet, Senior Regulatory Analyst with Kerr-McGee, and thank you for having us on this hearing. In front of you are the topics of this presentation. Next slide. This is an introduction to Kerr-McGee Oil and Gas Onshore LP, which I know you all are familiar with. It's worth mentioning here that KMOG has achieved 0 routine flaring here in our DJ Basin operations, and that we are committed to operating responsibly, safely, and protecting the environment. As you can see here, this slide shows our CO2 equivalent emission intensity per barrel of oil equivalent extracted. As shown here, compared to previous OGDP presentations, what we have here is focus on EPA methodology, not the state of Colorado methodology, which we've showed before. So this graph shows that emission intensity and the elimination of emission sources that are like pneumatic controllers, tanks, and compressors have resulted in lowering that intensity compared to our peers here in Colorado. This slide also discusses our integrated operations center, our water on demand system, our oil pipeline takeaway facility, and our emission intensity. Next slide. As mentioned by Ms. Waselinki, the Blue Chip and Rainbow locations were carefully selected to protect the environment, the health and safety and welfare of receptors. The Blue Chip location will have 12 wells going east to west, and the Rainbow location will have 14 wells going east and then 14 wells going west. And the SUA was executed for the Blue Chip location. As far as the relevant local government, it's the city of Greeley for both locations. And the city has approved USR permits back in October for both of these locations. It's also worth mentioning that both locations do not meet any Rule 304 B2B criteria. So they are outside of 2,000 foot buffer from any residential building units, any high occupancy building units, and school areas, also outside of high priority habitat and designated outside activity areas and outside of the floodplain. In front of you is the permitting timeline for this OGDP. We submitted the OGDP application and the USR application back in May of 2022. And we have not received any petitions filed for this application. The USR permit was approved again by the city of Greeley back in October. And we have not seen again any petitions filed for this application. Next slide. This shows the phases of operations planned. We do plan to begin construction and operation as soon as these permits are approved. And we hope to be able to complete continuous operations starting directly after the approval. The KMOG planning teams work diligently on siting the Rainbow location to provide protections for public health, safety, welfare, and the environment and wildlife resources. And this aerial here shows the location in relation to receptors. So as you can see, there are no residential building units, no high occupancy building units, school properties, facilities, or designated outside activity areas within 2,000 feet of the Rainbow location. This is the wildlife habitat for the Rainbow location, showing that this site will be outside of all high priority habitat. The blue circle that you see on the map shows the 1 mile buffer area. We did commit to including a survey for raptor and burrow and owl nests as part of a best management practice to be completed no more than 7 days prior to the start of pre-production operations for this pad. As for the Blue Chip location, KMOG again worked hard and diligently on siting the Blue Chip location to provide as much protections of public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources as possible. It shows here that the Blue Chip location is outside of the 2,000 foot distance for, again, residential building units, high occupancy building units, school properties and facilities, and designated outside activity areas. Same as the Rainbow location, this Blue Chip location is also outside of high priority habitat. Again, the yellow circle here shows the 1 mile buffer area that's required in the regulations. As for the beneficial impacts for this OGDP, we are committed to plugging and abandoning 27 wells. And with those wells comes the decommissioning of 10 facilities. As you can see on this aerial, the red dots on the show the wells that will be plugged. And out of those 27 wells, 18 will be within 2,000 feet of a residential building unit. So the decommissioning of the 10 facilities will include removing 12 produced water tanks, oiled and 18 oil tanks. It will also include the removal of old facility equipment. To mention some would be the driven pneumatic controllers. It will also eliminate roughly 1,300 truck trips annually to these existing locations and reclaim 14 acres of existing facility footprint. So we'll have a net 3 acres more reclaimed than the project has originally disturbed. Also, working from feedback that we received during prior hearings, we included the well emission reduction data for these 27 wells that'll be plugged, as you can see there in the table. And some of the additional benefits from these facility removals will include the removal of also some of the fugitive emissions from equipment leaks associated with old existing infrastructure. This slide here highlights the best management practices that will be applied to this OGDP as a result of KMOG's existing infrastructure here in the DJ Basin. This includes our water on demand system that eliminates truck trips. We will have oil pipeline takeaway facility that will have pipeline takeaway for oil and gas. This will eliminate the largest emission source on the pad and will also eliminate 115,533 truck trips to the location. We'll also have remote monitoring and operational capabilities for this site through our integrated operations center. We will also plan to use air actuated pneumatic devices that will use air instead of natural gas. And we do intend to use Group 3 drilling mud in a closed loop system to avoid impacts from odor and emissions. As far as the graph on the right-hand side of the slide, it shows how our actual tank VOC emissions have dramatically been reduced as we have grown production in the DJ Basin over the last decade. To continue on best management practices, for emissions, we do intend on having AVO inspections and temporary emission control devices. Our drilling rig will also have a noise reduction features. We do intend to use quiet completions fleet for sound reduction, and we have conducted baseline ambient noise monitoring on both of these locations. For light, we will intend on using LED lights that will be angled away from surrounding residential building units. And for dust, we worked on installing tracking control systems to eliminate dust, and then mud tracking. And we also will place water on dirt roads to be able to mitigate that dust. As far as stormwater BMPs, we have approved grading and drainage plans designed to mitigate stormwater impacts that have been given a blessing and approval from the city of Greeley. To manage the traffic to these sites, we've been coordinating with both the city of Greeley and the Colorado Department of Transportation. These two aerials here show the anticipated traffic flow for both Rainbow and Blue Chip. And these traffic flows were designed to provide a direct path to the site, and then from Rainbow to Highway 34, and then from Blue Chip to Highway 257. We have both access permits approved by the Colorado Department of Transportation, and KMOG committed to building acceleration and deceleration lanes for Rainbow Pad to mitigate impacts to traffic. Now I'll pass it over to Mr. Chad Chitzlemeyer, our air quality manager.
Thank you, Mr. Salmon. Hi, my name is Chad Chitzlemeyer. I'm an environmental manager with COGCC. The air monitoring plans for these locations will be approved by the CDPHE. Monthly reports will be submitted during active operations, and a summary will be posted on our COGCC stakeholder website. Next slide, please. We've been conducting air monitoring using our approved program since September of 2020. Below shows a number of sites where we've done air monitoring during each phase. The main components of our program are continuous VOC analyzers and continuous benzene monitoring using carbon sorbent tubes. As a little background, when EPA promulgated the maximum available control technology for petroleum refineries, they required benzene monitoring using EPA method 325. We've incorporated this method into our program. Our program has 3 investigation levels that are all based on historical data and are protective of public health, but they are an indication of a change in emissions that requires an investigation. The figure on the right here shows the approved monitor layout for the Blue Chip pad. The tan circles are the continuous VOC analyzers equipped with the carbon sorbent tube locations, and the blue circles are locations of the carbon sorbent tubes. Next slide, please. Since 2020, we've collected over 4,700 benzene samples. The figure on the bottom right shows all the samples collected during production drilling, completions, and production facility operations. As shown, all the results are well below the CDPHE health guidance value of 9 ppb. Prior to any activities, we do baseline monitoring. The figure in the bottom left shows all of the monitoring. As shown, there are background concentrations. Next slide, please. Below are the distances to the nearest RBUs. The design for these facilities will be similar to locations where we've done air monitoring. Therefore, the historical monitoring data will be representative of the operations at these pads. As you move away from the pad, there will be a decrease in emission concentrations. Based on limited review, there's approximately a 20% decrease in benzene emissions as you go from 165 feet to 300 feet. Therefore, emission concentrations at the nearest RBUs will be less than historical data, realizing there are background concentrations. And I'll turn it back to Mr. Samet.
Thank you. For community engagement, we have sent over 300 project overview completeness packets to residential building units, to property owners, and mineral owners. We also organized a virtual neighborhood meeting and invited surface owners within half-mile of the parcel boundaries for both locations, and no surface owners attended the meeting. In addition, all 5 public comments that were received were positive and in support of the project. And KMOG will continue to present updates on the progress of this project, if approved, through our website and our stakeholder relations team. In summary, the City of Greeley has submitted positive feedback and approved the USR applications for both of these locations. There were no petitions filed, and we believe that the North Core OGDP does provide protections of public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. We have obtained director's recommendation of approval. We believe that the pest management practices that we put forward avoid, minimize, and mitigate temporary impacts to the community and the environment. We do believe that plugging and abandoning 27 wells and removing 10 facilities and reclaiming the acreage that we discussed in the presentation, which will result in 3 more net acres than originally disturbed, will provide some beneficial impacts to the area as well. And now I'll turn it back to Mrs. Wozniacki.
Thank you, Mr. Samet. This slide shows the relief requested for the North Core OGDP, and I'm happy to leave this up as needed. And this does conclude our presentation. We've got a list of subject matter experts from Kerr-McGee who are available for questions.
Great, thank you. If you could actually pull down the slide, I'll be able to see everybody a little bit better. Great, now I can see everybody. Okay, thanks for the presentation. I would start with just a comment. I'm very much appreciative of Kerr-McGee's walking through its air monitoring on locations and providing us with its information as to the fact that its locations are, establish a safe record. That's really helpful for us to get as we consider new locations. So thank you for that. Commissioners, I'm looking around to see if folks have questions. Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I'll make a comment as well. If there are other operators that are looking for an example of a good presentation, this is it. So well done on the presentation. It was a lot of information that was provided in there in a way that was easy to understand and absorb. And so I do appreciate that. With that, I do have a couple of questions, particularly around wildlife considerations on the rainbow pad. I know that there was some potential burrowing owl habitats, and in the wildlife plan that was provided. I guess in the wildlife plan, it initially said that there weren't enough trees to have raptor nests, but then it turns out there was raptor nests. And in there for both the burrowing owls and the raptors, it talked about a 3-part survey. I think Mr. Samet, in your comments, you indicated just 1 survey 7 days out, but do you intend to do the full 3-part survey for both the raptors and the burrowing owls?
Yeah, I'll let Mr. Joseph Reimer elaborate on that. He's our wildlife expert.
Okay.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Mesner. Joseph Reamer, I'm an HSC advisor with Oxy. So the three-part survey is the CPW protocol for burrowing owls and establishing their presence or absence. Since they're a subterranean bird, it can be fairly tricky to establish which burrow or burrows they are using. So CPW recommends 3 surveys over 2 weeks if you're planning development during that window of March 15th to October 30th or August 31st. For the raptor, it would just be a one-time survey. Just as you're aware, for our planning process, we do an environmental assessment before we begin any work on any location, regardless of time of year. So whether we start this location in December, or if we start it in March, for example, we're going to do the same survey. On this one, we've committed to 7 days prior to construction. So if we're outside that burrowing owl habitat window or that burrowing owl nesting window, we'll just be doing the one survey. However, if construction or drilling moves into that window, we will do those 3 surveys over 2 weeks as prescribed by Colorado Parks and Wildlife.
Thank you for that. And correct me if I'm wrong, though. Was there a BMP associated with the 2A where you did indicate that you were not going to conduct activities during burrowing owl timing restrictions, I guess, or perhaps I'm reading it wrong.
So we would assess our risk, and if burrowing owls were determined to be present, we would consult with Colorado Parks and Wildlife at that time, and we would most likely delay our operations. Unfortunately, the exact phrasing of that BMP escapes me currently, but I can go pull that up right now.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, I can confirm that that is an accurate description of that BMP.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I have the BMP pulled up here. I can read the language. So it says an environmental assessment, including a survey for raptor and burrowing owl nests, will be completed no more than 7 days prior to the start of pre-production operations. If during the environmental assessment an active nest is identified within the buffer recommended by CPW, KMOG will consult with CPW prior to beginning pre-production operations. And notably, the last portion says, if active burrowing owl habitat is found within 1/4 mile buffer of the working pad surface, pad construction will occur outside the STIP window of March 15th to August 31st.
Thank you for that, AAG Mercer. That's helpful. And I'll leave it to Commissioner Ackerman, who is the expert in this. But I wonder if there shouldn't be language included in that talking about the 3-part survey for burrowing owls rather than just the one-time survey, should there be a need to do that. But I am not the expert in that, so I'm not going to determine whether that's appropriate or not.
Further questions? Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will second or third the comments from commissioners that this is a good presentation with good information in it. I'm wondering if staff was watching this presentation and if the information on slide 13 will take care of what you know I'm going to ask for, which is emissions reductions, land reclamation, and vehicle mile emissions and miles reduced from peeing and aying wells, or if I need to ask for a sundry.
Thank you, Commissioner McGowan. I'm actually, if you could just give me a few moments, I can circle back and answer that question for you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's all I had for questions.
Further questions? Commissioner Cross?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. It was very helpful. I wanted to talk about a couple questions related to your offsets. Of the 27 wells and 10 facilities that you're going to be P&A and decommissioning respectively, are any of those wells currently holding the lease?
I believe that that's a question, Commissioner Cross, that will probably take some time. We can probably get back to you on that by the end of this Q&A session.
Okay. But safe to say that they'll be P&A'd and reclaimed pretty quickly after the drilling, but it's not proposed to be done during the construction time.
Correct.
Okay. And then one other question I wanted to talk about with respect to the production facility. I know that I believe other commissioners have recently toured some of your new production facilities. Is this going to be the same production facility design that you've kind of upgraded to in terms of lower numbers of separators, et cetera?
Yes, correct. I can confirm that.
Okay, and similar to that, I believe, and I apologize if I'm giving the wrong name. I believe at the Henry facility before, you had, after a time, were able to reduce the number of separators. Is that something that would also happen here if the need for the number of separators is diminished?
I'll let our facilities manager maybe answer that question, Commissioner Cross.
And Commissioner Cross, as we're waiting for that, I did just want to confirm that we don't believe any of those wells to be P&A'd are holding a lease.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
We may need to circle back to your second question as well.
That's fine.
Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While we're waiting, I guess I have a similar question to the applicant before us, which is kind of the odd shape. I think it's the blue chip, which is on the bottom, rainbow's on the top, and whether or not that's because those minerals are already being developed and why it's kind of, that end is kind of cut off and you're not going as far as the rainbow. And I may have them mixed up geographically, sorry.
Yeah, I can have our mineral land person, Crosby Garrison, Ms. Garrison, answer that for you.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner McGowan. There is development to the west of the blue chip pad already, so that's why we did not extend that way. And then there are existing verticals there, or in development there on the west or east as well.
Further questions? I think we're still waiting a few answers.
I do have an answer for Commissioner Cross's question on the facility type compared to what you've seen on the tour. So it'll be similar to that facility, smaller footprint, and we can redeploy equipment when it is not needed for those initial large volumes.
Thank you.
I can take that question on the facility type. The facility that you toured recently was a bulk and test design, which is our new standard facility design for the, oh, I apologize, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Julia Eichenberger. I am the facilities planning engineer for the DJ. The bulk and test design, Commissioner Cross, that you had toured recently is the smaller footprint design that we have been moving towards, and both of these locations will utilize that design. You are correct, that design does allow us to reduce our equipment footprint in future when volumes drop enough that we can remove a portion of that equipment.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Commissioner Ackerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. I also, again, wanted to, I guess, fourth the comments that were made about the quality of this presentation. I specifically wanted to appreciate the operator for focusing on the elimination of emissions and the restoration of acreage, the removal of equipment, the reduction and elimination of truck trips that this type of modern develop will precipitate. I think that's a story that's very important. I think it is a story of the revised regulations and the efforts that operators are making to be less impactful to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, wildlife resources. And so I find that information very valuable and informative, and appreciate you sharing it in the format in which you did. I also, the only note I had was predictably the same issue that that Commissioner Messner brought up. And I do appreciate the inclusion of a BMP on raptors and burrowing owls. I do think Commissioner Messner was right on in that the CPW protocol for burrowing owl surveys generally requires no fewer than 3 surveys spaced at least a week apart for burrowing owls in order to detect their presence. And so I wonder if you would be amenable to perhaps changing that BMP language to something that simply says following CPW survey protocols. We certainly can be more precise than that if we need to be, but would be interested in hearing your thoughts on that. I do think that while there is variation site by site, generally CPW recommends a minimum of 3 surveys a week apart. And so I think that if you do 1 survey 7 days prior, it wouldn't be in accordance with CPW protocols. It would necessitate kind of a 21-day outlook. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that and the possibility of being able to modify that BMP. And that is all I had, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Commissioner Ackerman, I'll have Mr. Joseph Reamer again address that comment on the BMP language.
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman, for the question. I would direct you to our wildlife protection plan. We actually do have that BMP in there that commits to follow that CPW 3 survey protocol, with that last survey of the 3 coming no later than 7 days prior to start of construction. So that is in our wildlife protection plan.
Thank you, Mr. Reamer. And although the BMP in the 2A reads something different, then I'll take that statement to as a commitment to follow the protocol as set forth in the wildlife plan. I appreciate that.
I see that Mr. Christopher has been elevated. Does he have something to add?
My name is Brian Christopher. I was the lead OGLA for the COGCC for the review of this OGDP. And just circling back to Commissioner McGowan's comments regarding the emissions reductions from the plugging abandonment of the wells and facilities. The approach I'm seeing as best is just adding this as text to the Form 2B so we can track it on the Form 2B. And is that what you were intending and looking for?
Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just want to, so I know that we're still trying to figure out, I realize it's not in our rules and they don't have to submit this information, but I think from a cumulative impacts perspective, as we move forward and continue to have these discussions about offsets, the information, we need to track the information somehow. And so if that works for staff to put it in the Form 2B and the operator's willing to put it in there, great. If it works to track it as a sundry submittal, then we can do it that way as well. But I want to make sure over time we're able to somehow track the emissions reductions, the reclaimed land, vehicle mile traveled reductions, et cetera. So if 2B submittal works for staff and the operator is willing to add it to their 2B, then great.
Further questions for the panel? Commissioner Ackerman?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry I skipped something, so I apologize for the follow-up. But in the BMP, again, on the raptors and burrowing owls, it's specific to citing pad construction outside of the 315 to 831 date. My assumption, Mr. Reamer, is that that would also include drilling and completion outside of those dates.
Yes, Commissioner Ackerman, it will.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
And based on our schedule, again, we'll survey now if pad construction, begins this fall or winter as currently scheduled. And then depending on the gap between pad construction, drilling and completions, we will survey again prior to the drill rig showing up, prior to the completion crews showing up as well.
Thank you, Mr. Reamer.
Further questions? Seeing no further questions, do we have a motion?
Move for approval of the application.
Second.
Motion from Commissioner Cross, second from Commissioner Messner. Is there further discussion?
Mr. Chair, do we not need to add anything that we all just discussed, or has that all been addressed? The burrowing owls with the correct language in the BMP and adding emissions data and other data to the Form 2B.
AAG Mercer, thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say that it's really at the commission's pleasure whether you would like to add BMP language so that's memorialized on the 2A versus relying on the conversations on the record. I would suggest it might be clearer if everything that you've discussed is on the 2A. So what I heard was amending the wildlife BMP to add the language that's in the BMP and the wildlife plan regarding burrowing owl surveys and providing that updated emission reduction data via a Form 4.
Commissioner Cross, are you amenable to said friendly amendment?
I am so amenable. Just to clarify, are we adding it via the Form 4 or via the 2B?
I may have misspoken there. I would defer to staff on.
Ms. Trask?
I think we can simply add it to the form. Oh, sorry, I think we can simply add it to the Form 2B prior to mechanically approving that form in web forms.
With that change, I'd amend the application to clarify for the modification of the BMPs and the 2A to match the wildlife plan, as well as adding the reductions information into the Form 2B.
And
yes,
Commissioner Messner, you're good?
Yeah, I second it again.
And Ms. Wazelinski, before we take a vote, are you and or your client comfortable with the amended motion?
Yes, we are, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion? And there's so many people in the room, I can't see all my commissioners at once. So if you want to talk, pipe up.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a second to indicate my appreciation for the offset considerations in this application. I think that's being able to look at an application that has near no net adverse impacts for a new operation is significant and very compelling. And also having those offset impacts with an associated timeline is a really good thing as well. So the fact that these are occurring within 1 year, I think is very compelling as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Any further commissioner comments? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you to the panel.
Thank you.
We've got one more OGDP. Let's take 5 minutes. There's a whole bunch of people that need to be unelevated. Let's return at 10:39. We're back on the record. We will now take up docket number 2205-00093, Crestone Peak Resources Operating the Prosper Farms proposed oil and gas development plan. We did not have any public written or oral comment. We will begin with a presentation from Crestone.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, and can everyone see that in presentation mode?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, great. Well, thank you again. Good morning, Chair, Commissioners, Council, members of the public. My name is Jamie Jose from Jose Synergy Law, and I, along with my partner, Kelsey Wazelinski, represent Crestone Peak Resources Operating LLC on this Prosper Farms OGDP application before you this morning. Crestone appreciates the commissioners, the communication, the inquiries, and the hard work of the staff as you've reviewed this Prosper Farms OGDP application. We have three presenters today. Mr. Dan Harrington, Mr. Nathan Bennett, and Ms. Kathy Stearman will be presenting the Prosper Farms OGDP application this morning. And we also have several subject matter experts who will be on the panel for any questions that may arise. And with that, I would like to go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Dan Harrington.
Thank you, Ms. Jost, and good morning, commissioners and staff. Thank you for hearing us here today. We're here to present the Prosper Farms oil and gas location. Here we have an overview map. This pad is located in unincorporated Arapahoe County in Section 2, just south of I-70. The nearest crossroads are 6th Avenue and Hayesmount. We do have an approved local permit from Arapahoe County. This pad will develop 2 DSUs, a 1280 and a 1920, for a total of 3,200 developed acres, and it does infill some existing wells in the area. We're looking at 11 new horizontal wells alongside the 6 existing horizontal wells in the 2 DSUs. We have no RBUs within 2,000 feet of the working pad surface, no schools, no high occupancy building units, no outdoor activity areas, and no HPH. We are near a DI community, but there are no RBUs within the DI community within 2,000 feet. No ALA was required, and we have received no public comments and no petitions. I'd like to give a quick overview of some of the work we've done to consolidate the pads along Hayesmount Road. Hayesmount Road is, of course, the north-south road here that runs along several of our pad sites. The green pads here are existing legacy pads, all of which were built and drilled by our predecessor company, ConocoPhillips. Since acquisition of the asset, Crestone and now Civitas have done a great deal of work trying to consolidate the original development plan into fewer, larger pads, developing multiple DSUs in all these cases in both directions. You heard the Lone Tree North OGDP in the first quarter of this year, in the south here in the green development area. That pad is a 14-well pad, and it replaced 3 planned pads or pad expansions within that development area. You heard Sky Ranch in the second quarter. That's a 12-well pad, again, bidirectional drilling that replaced 2 planned pads in the development area. And now we have the Prosper Farms 2-1 South. That is an expansion of the existing 2-well pad, the Prosper Farms 2-1 South 2. Again, it will be an 11-well pad, and it will complete infill of both the Property Reserve 3-4 DSU and the Swan 6-1-2 DSU. This pad replaces 3 planned pads or pad expansions: the Property Reserve 3-4 North Phase 2, the Property Reserve 3-4 South, which are both Aurora operator agreement sites that we will, again, not be pursuing. And in addition, the Swan pad in Section 6 to the east. We also wanted to address the relation of the Prosper Farms OGDP to the Box Elder cap. The Prosper Farms 2-1 oil and gas location is located in unincorporated Arapahoe County. As you may recall from our Box Elder hearing a few weeks ago here, Box Elder was limited to pads that are within the city limits of Aurora and are covered by the Aurora operator agreement. As such, the Prosper Farms 2-1 is not considered a Box Elder cap pad. However, this pad is within 1 mile of the cap boundary, and the cap boundary here is the gold line with cap proper in orange and buffer area in yellow. The Prosper Farms 2-1 pad does sit within the buffer area, and as such, its cumulative impacts were included and addressed in the Box Elder cap CI analysis. Oil and gas production volumes reported for the, and this is actually a typo, that's meant to be 13 wells in the Prosper Farms OGDP will not be attributed to the Box Elder cap. Addressing specifically Commissioner question 1 on this issue, the Box Elder cap's boundary was established early in 2021 in consultation with COGCC staff, as well as the city of Aurora. And the intent there was to align to a single RLG and to the Aurora operator agreement. Both the staff and the RLG were consulted and were supportive of this approach. But again, with the Prosper Farms 2-1 sitting in the buffer area, its cumulative impacts were captured in the CI statement that you saw along with box elder cap. As to the development of sections 3 and 4 from this site, which as you can see are within the cap boundary, the reason we set it up this way is that we do have existing producing legacy wells within sections 3 and 4 from sites within the cap, the Property Reserve North and the Property Reserve 1H. So that DSU sort of was required to be included in the box elder to keep it whole in that sense. And actually in the initial cap submission, the Property Reserve South and North Phase 2 were active sites. Between the initial submission in 2021 and the 2022 resubmittal, our service land team was able to renegotiate the Prosper Farms 2-1 SUA to allow off-lease drilling to the west. That allowed us to consolidate those planned sites onto the single larger location, thus reducing surface impacts. So as it is a little messy with the box elder cap boundary, but we feel this is the best configuration for public protection. To run through our procedural background, this OGDP was filed in May 2022. There were some minor amendments to follow. We reached completeness in August and sent out our 7-day notice letter. Our 60-day hearing notice went out in mid-month August. The 30-day public comment period closed in September with no comments. Our petition deadline ended in October with no comments or petitions. And here we are at hearing today. As I stated, the relevant local government for this pad site is Arapahoe County, and we do have an approved permit. It was approved on the 11th of October. And we do have a director's recommendation for approval of this site, and we want to thank the director and staff for their review of this OGDP. Our timing of development, we'd like to start construction and expansion of the existing Prosper Farms 2-1 location next month. We'd like to start drilling this site in January, and we anticipate being done with completions in the third quarter, likely in August, and we'll have first production later in the third quarter. With that, I'll introduce Mr. Nathan Bennett to go over some of our BMPs for the site.
Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Nathan Bennett, and I am the Director of Permitting and Compliance for Civitas Crestone. My remarks this morning will be brief and limited to highlighting the best management practices that we intend to employ at this location. Crestone commits to electrifying the drilling rig and utilizing IOGP Group 3 drilling fluids during drilling operations at the Prosper Farms 2-1 location. Other BMPs include a drill cuttings management program, sound walls for noise mitigation, electrified production facilities, and pipeline infrastructure for both oil and natural gas that will be constructed and ready to service production from the new wells on day one. Further, we acknowledge the condition of approval put forth in the director's recommendation and agree to update ambient sound readings, should updates be necessary, via Form 4 sundry prior to commencing construction operations. We received several commissioner questions earlier this week regarding the application of certain BMPs for the Prosper Farms 2-1 oil and gas location. In response to the first question regarding commitment to electricity and oil pipeline, it was not clear at the time the application was submitted in May that Civitas Crestone would be able to make a 100% commitment to these BMPs prior to the initiation of the respective operational phase. We are very careful about committing to BMPs that we cannot fulfill. However, we are constantly working to implement practices that are as protective as possible, and will implement those practices when we are certain that we can. The other questions were related to the applicability of the box elder cap BMPs to this location. As was mentioned, the Prosper Farms 2-1 location is not within the box elder cap, and therefore is not subject to the box elder BMPs. It is very important to note, however, that the key BMPs will be substantively similar to those implemented at box elder sites, such as Tier 4 engines, oil takeaway, and electrification. I will now turn the presentation over to Ms. Stearman.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. So this is a quick overview of some of the air practices. Let me introduce myself, Kathy Stearman, the Director of Air Programs. Apologize. We are going to talk a little bit about the overview of some of our air practices on this slide. We now know that oil pipeline will be connected to Prosper Farms, and this eliminates the truckload out at the facility for oil. So this results in 100% elimination of the truckload out emissions for the life of the facility. The development plan also includes well consolidation and tank upgrades, and the new tanks are going to have blowers. There are 2 existing wells that will be rerouted to the new facility upon reconstruction, and that gives us the benefit of consolidating emissions into a newer site. Adding blowers to the tanks reduces the estimated VOC emissions by approximately 90% for the first year of production. Maintenance emissions will be controlled in 2023, and that should result in about 47% of VOC reductions that were estimated for the first year of production. I was going to pause here to, again, also try to answer some commissioner questions about BMPs, maybe more specific to the air topic. It does appear to me that the BMPs that were agreed to on the box elder cap very much align with what we know we're doing at Prosper Farms. We also know that this facility is going to be drilled on line power. So when we remove that primary diesel power generator from the on-pad estimated pre-production emissions, we're going to see a 3% decrease of NOx emissions on the pad. The ambient air monitoring plan was submitted to the Air Pollution Control Division on October 20th, and the local government, Aurora, has already provided comments supporting the monitoring plan as filed. We appreciate that. Crestone has committed to continuous leak detection camera installations on all new facilities in 2023, and Prosper Farms will be expected to be part of this trial. While we plan to perform our pre-production activities at the Prosper Farm outside of the ozone season, because our planning is early 2023, we are still committed to the language that clarifies activities that we can and will adhere to, like actions that are related to company vehicles and scheduling our well maintenance. And we agree to better clarify these languages that are really more as feasible, like vendor operations and vendor refueling and dirt moving. I am now going to turn the presentation back to Mr. Harrington.
Thank you, Ms. Stearman. I'd like to run quickly here through the technical exhibits supporting our spacing applications that accompany this OGDP. Here is the land story. We currently hold 98% leasehold in the DSU 1, sections 3 and 4, and 68% leasehold in DSU 2, sections 2, 1, and 6. These DSUs contain both fee and federal minerals. Surface is entirely fee, and we do have an SUA in place. And Crestone is committed to finalizing a CA with the BLM for development of the federal mineral acreage here. To the geology, we are only developing Niobrara in this OGDP. The Niobrara formation is approximately 310 feet thick throughout the development area and is continuous. And our engineering work is shown here. And again, we're looking to drill 11 new wells and 2 DSUs, 2-mile wells westward and 3-mile wells eastward. And that, in addition to the 7 existing wells in the development area, this will complete infill of both DSUs. The drainage calculations vary a little bit between the 2- and 3-mile wells. We're seeing half lengths of 179 feet for the 2-mile wells and 215 feet for the 3-mile wells. Both of those are less than the requested 330-foot setbacks. So to sum up, the Prosper Farms oil and gas location is protective of the public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. It is approved by the relevant local government. It is supported by Director Murphy's recommendation, and it includes BMPs that avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts to the community and the environment. We'd request approval for this 3,200 acre Prosper Farms OGDP for the development of 11 new horizontal wells from a single expanded pad site, completing development of both DSUs. And with that, we can thank you again and end the presentation.
Great, thank you. We thank you for the presentation, and we now will turn to the stage of consideration for commissioner questions. Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation and the information today. I have a couple of questions. One is, I think I read that as you expand this pad, older equipment will be replaced with newer equipment. And I'm wondering if that results in an emissions reduction, and if there's a way for us to measure that, or have you thought about that?
I can take that question, Commissioner. I think some of the benefits of tank battery consolidation include moving over to newer tanks where they're going to have those additional controls. And some other benefits, if I might read some of the information that our facilities and engineers explained to me, it does reduce the overall surface area of the finished facilities. It reduces the number of tanks. So I think in this case, we're going to be going from 8 tanks to 6. It will update the vapor control system, the blowers, and how the ECDs, the enclosed combustion devices, interact with that. There will be instrument air, and it's a little bit more efficient on our power use. And as far as the emission reductions, really, I think what stands out to me most is that we won't be hauling oil off. So in other words, when we're taking those vertical wells into the new facility, that eliminates that process. And yeah, we can measure that from an emissions calculation standpoint. It is mostly impacted on the VOC side, probably less than 1 ton per year after the controls, because that is a controlled process. But yeah, I hope that helps answer your question.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thanks. And I think that's, I'm glad that you talked about that, because I think that's something we also talked about in the CAP, and it wasn't quite clear what was going to happen when older equipment might still be on a site that you're looking at to expand or consolidate. I have to say, and I'm not familiar with what the blowers are in the tanks. And from a high level, could you explain what that is?
I can. So when we look at the control devices on many of our tanks, specifically for Civitas, we are calculating a combustion control efficiency. And that control efficiency is typically calculated at 95% destruction. So in some world, we're estimating that 5% of those combusted emissions are not combusted. I think we're going to learn a lot more about that in 2023 as we're actually testing these combustors. And I think it's going to be good news, at least for our company, on how those numbers stack up. But what this allows us to do is to take 100% of the tank vapors and put them into the line. These are newer technologies. The way I understand it is they're becoming easier and easier for our company in particular to use. They're more reliable. So that's why we feel it's a good transition. But when those blowers are working, there will be no combustion of the tank vapors. So we'll still have combustors out there because we want the backup as a control. But really the way we can calculate those tank emissions is as if they weren't there.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, I had another technical question and now it just escaped me. It'll come back, don't worry. I'm gonna, if I could transition to it, as someone reading the application and then realizing this was like just outside the CAP boundary and we had just finished talking about the CAP, I am wondering how many more sites you anticipate submitting for OGDPs that are in this buffer zone in Arapahoe County, and if it might not, and maybe, so maybe you're not, maybe this is it, maybe this is like a little outlier, but if it's not, I think for me personally as a commissioner, it would have been nice to see the package as a whole. And I don't think that our CAP rules limit you to one relevant local government when we're talking about looking at the development of a whole geographic area. And so I'm wondering what the plans are for any areas outside of the geographic area of the cap. It seems kind of odd that we have the location is located outside the, this boundary that we created this for the cap, but you're developing minerals that are inside the cap. So to me, it feels like it should have been a part of the cap, and then we wouldn't have had to individually discuss this. So I'm wondering if you have thoughts about that, or you could address that. And then whether or not I think I heard someone say at the beginning of this discussion that this was also part of consolidating a development plan. And is this a development plan that is with Arapahoe County, or the same development plan that is with the city of Aurora? This is all kind of, it feels very intermixed to me, but then we've separated it out, and I would like for us to discuss it a little more.
I can feel that. Thank you, Commissioner McGowan. The Watkins area field is, of course, a continuous Niobrara resource that is bulk leasehold controlled by Civitas, and that area runs all the way from DIA down to the Douglas County boundary, and from E470 in the west all the way through 464 to the east. Submitting that large of an area as a single cap would have been very unwieldy. So early on the cap process, we did think about ways to break it up into individual caps that were progressible as they were. That decision to limit the Box Elder cap to Aurora operator agreement sites was discussed at length with COGC staff in kind of March 2021, as well as the relevant local government, Aurora, and they both supported that. I think we have to draw a boundary somewhere, and if you include Pad X, then I think that's the question. Well, what about the next section over, and what about the next? And soon you have the entire field as one giant cap, which is pretty difficult to process, as you can imagine. That's why the buffer area rule exists. That's why we account for all of our planned developments in the buffer area in the CI statement, so we still have a holistic view of the cumulative impacts. I will note that immediately to the south of the Box Elder boundary, we have submitted a second cap. That's the Lowry Ranch cap, and we'll look forward to discussing that with you likely next year. To your final question of the number of pads within the cap boundary area, we're looking at one right now. The Prosperum's 2-1. There's another one, the Sky Ranch, that was approved in second quarter of this year by the commission. I can see approximately 2 or 3 more that will come forward, and those all sit either within unincorporated Adams County or unincorporated Arapahoe County. And to your very last question, as to the development plan that this consolidates, it's a bit of a mix of what essentially what our predecessor companies were planning. In this case, 2 of the sites were officially cited in the Aurora operator agreement, the Property Reserve North Phase 2 and the Property Reserve South. So those were real sites that we had a vested right to that we won't be using. And the third, the Swan pad in Section 6, did progress a good ways with both COGCC and Arapahoe County permitting several years ago, until that site's progression was abandoned. So these were actual sites that have been replaced. I think we would call it an operator's development plan, but there is publicly filed backup for those sites.
Okay, thanks. So I think what I hear you saying is we're going to be seeing another cap application for another larger geographic landscape view of the area south of the Box Elder.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a plan to create a cap with Arapahoe as you work your way east, or are you kind of at the end of working your way east? I guess maybe I didn't explain what I was trying to ask appropriately.
We're close on that, and that is up for we're still working on plans for that. The number of new permitted sites that would go into such a cap would be relatively small. And it's worth a discussion as to whether that necessitates a cap or just a few single OGDPs.
Okay. As we move forward and we see maybe more requests in Arapahoe County as you're moving east, it would be helpful for me to kind of understand the role of Arapahoe County and how you maybe work collaboratively with them to determine what the area was going to look like, what you're going to develop, what you're not going to develop, how the sites were selected. I mean, it was easier to see that with the city of Aurora. And I realize that this isn't, maybe you're not planning on doing a cap with Arapahoe County, but these all feel very interrelated. It's the same geographic area. And it would be helpful from a commission standpoint to know that this had been kind of put together collaboratively with the local government. It was hard for me to tell kind of how that process is working and how you're doing that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. There is nothing as firm as the Aurora operator agreement that applies to Arapahoe County. However, we do work collaboratively with Arapahoe County staff on all of our OGDPs filed in Arapahoe County. And I think it's safe to say that replacing the Conoco area Swan Pad, which was problematic, with the Prosper Farms 2-1 was good news for Arapahoe. They supported that.
Okay, thanks. And I know what my other technical question was. Can you tell me what energy source we're using for completion? So I'm super appreciative that you guys are committing to electric drill rig. This is a non-attainment area, and I think I saw Tier 4 engines, and I'm wondering if the thought process around that has been also updated with last minute news.
I can take that, Commissioner. We are testing what's called an electrified fracturing fleet. And, I expect the company is going to continue to use that, but I don't know how many fleets are available. And looking this far out, I don't know that that is something that we're willing to commit to because it is still kind of in a test phase. But yes, I think one of the things that's worth noting is that there's still power generation on site for an electric frac fleet. But we are right now working on what the emissions benefits are to looking at how that setup affects the on-pad emissions. So I think in practicality, we will be using that electrified frac fleet. And we're building that out as it goes. It's not just off the shelf. It's kind of being kitted almost like in stages. So to say it's there and 100%, maybe not as accurate as I'd like to be because we're building it as it goes.
Thank you for your conversation.
For Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks for the questions, Commissioner McGowan. There were some of the similar questions that I had. I am struggling with the proximity to this location to the box elder cap and a previous OGDP that was approved that also has proximity to the box elder cap. And I actually think that this site is appropriate. And so that's not the concern because I do think that you've cited this site outside of certain receptors and there's a lot to like about this site. At the same time, understanding that this company has a significant amount of land in this particular area, I would certainly encourage a reevaluation of how you're looking at this comprehensively in your approach to permitting these different areas. And I understand it's an incredibly large amount of land and that I think having smaller chunks of caps makes sense, but some consistency along the BMPs, consistency along the consultations, consistently along the evaluation and addressing the cumulative impacts, in this entire area throughout the different local government jurisdictions is going to be really important. I also think it's important that staff utilize Rule 303A8 as if they are starting to look like that we're seeing a bunch of OGDPs in this area that are better to be approached utilizing a cap than to utilize that rule to ensure that we are embracing the spirit of the rules, which is looking at cumulative, comprehensive evaluation and consistent BMPs and approaches to activities there, which I know that Civitas has done and will continue to do moving forward. But I'm going to start being really uncomfortable with one-offs as we start looking at this area, as we look at things comprehensively. The addition of the electrification of the rig and the other BMPs that were associated with this do appear to me to be substantially similar to the BMPs associated with the box elder, but without a clear cross-reference or a CDPHE consultation on this particular OGDP, it was a little bit hard for me to clearly tie those two things together, particularly being in a non-attainment area. And so I did, I did just want to make sure that I was clear, as far as how I was looking at this, because I think it will be important moving forward.
Further questions from commissioners? You guys are on different pages on my screen, so I'm trying to make sure I got all of you. I don't think I'm seeing further questions. If anyone has a question, pipe up. If not, Commissioner McGowan, I do see you.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. I would be curious to know if I'm not trying to put staff in a hot spot, but if kind of their viewpoint about, at least there are two commissioners I hear that are concerned of doing kind of continuing to patchwork outside of an already approved cap and creating more of a landscape view. I don't know if it makes it easier or harder for staff if commissioners are kind of pushing for this. Or it might just be Commissioner Mesner and I.
Well, I'll weigh in on that. I mean, I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but the rule that we created under 314 in the cap allows the applicant to make the determination of the appropriate boundaries for the cap and the lands that are going to be within the cap. I appreciate the points that are made, but I don't know that we necessarily created a rule that we, mandate utilization of cap. I think we all are of the opinion, and I don't want to speak for Commissioner Cross or Commissioner Ackerman or staff, but I think we all probably are of the opinion that the utilization of cap is a preferable permitting tool, and it has some significant, positives associated with it. But we did allow for permits to be approved individually under an OGDP. And so, my 2 cents is, while I can appreciate some of the points my fellow commissioners are making, I think it ultimately, the way we set up our rule is ultimately the applicant makes the determination of whether and when and how and the boundaries of a cap that they want to propose. I appreciate Mr. Harrington's point. If you, bring in one that's close, then you necessarily are going to be looking at, well, do we bring in the next one that's close? And, they're on down the line. So I don't know. I wanted to get my thoughts out on that point before we hear from staff. Does either Commissioner Cross or Commissioner Ackerman desire to weigh in on this topic? I also see Director Murphy has visualized herself. Commissioner Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I agree with you. I think that to a certain point that it is important to identify an appropriate boundary, and it's not really our place to identify what that boundary is. Similarly, I think given the time, while it gives additional time for the operator to develop the cap to a certain extent with that kind of slippery slope, as you describe it, in a way to continue to add on additional sites, additional acreage. If you go from 20,000 acres to now you're starting to go further and further out and you start getting to 100,000 acres, while I agree that the idea of consolidating and comprehensive planning is important, you also still run into the time issues with developing that within a certain time as well. And so I'll admit I was a little surprised when I saw something right on the edge there. It did come up during the cap discussion as well. But to me, I think ultimately it comes down to, I thought the drawing of the boundary was appropriate for the box elder cap, in part because it's a lot easier to look at BMPs, look at locations that are dealing with Aurora and what Aurora is wanting in that area, as opposed to saying, well, this is what this location thinks is the best idea, how the relevant local government wants to look at it, even though Civitas may want to do additional wells per each pad in other areas, whereas Aurora did not want that. And so for me, I thought that the kind of the separation of those is appropriate. I do still prefer comprehensive area plans, especially when it comes to larger areas that can be developed. But I do fully understand why, to a certain extent, you have to kind of draw the boundaries, and why a boundary was drawn here.
Commissioner Ackerman?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. And I won't belabor the point. I also had flagged this issue. And so, clearly it's on the minds of all the commissioners, but I think Commissioner Cross articulated my thoughts perfectly. I also understand, but would err towards inclusion in the cap where it makes sense. That said, I also understand why, when they're focused on the agreement with Aurora, they didn't include it. So nothing further to add other than what's already been said. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will disagree with a number of you on this particular topic, because I do think the discussions around caps did include discussions around consideration of encouraging the utilization of caps as a way to look at cumulative impacts and comprehensive planning, rather than one-off development that's leapfrogging each other, or as a way, it's illogical to me to potentially have a cap with certain BMPs associated with it and certain plannings associated with it, and then an OGDP immediately next to it that may have drastically different BMPs associated with it, even though we're trying to address this comprehensively. That doesn't mean that the expectation there was to create a cap that's 20,000 square miles. But I would point out that we did discuss during the mission change rulemaking, and included in the rules 303A8, that indicates that if an operator proposes multiple oil and gas locations and the director determines that the number of proposed locations, geographic scope, or high number of adjacent or nearby oil and gas development plans submitted by the same operator would be more appropriately considered as a cap, the director may request a meeting with the operator to evaluate whether the proposed oil and gas development plans should be resubmitted as a cap pursuant to Rule 314. In my opinion, that was the rule that we discussed in order to encourage an operator to reevaluate those particular situations as a cap. And like I said, this particular OGDP I think is cited well, and I don't have particular heartburn with it, particularly now that some of the BMPs associated with it I think are substantially similar to the BMPs that were included in the box elder cap. But should it have been submitted as it was initially proposed, it would have been significantly different than the adjacent OGDPs or sites that were preliminary cited within the box elder cap, which to me is just illogical as far as evaluating the potential impacts of oil and gas operations, in a comprehensive manner. So I'll kind of just reiterate my thoughts on that.
Does anyone from staff desire to provide some perspective? Ms. Trask?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to give a little bit of staff's perspective. Our interpretation of Rule 314 for a CAP application is that it would consider the cumulative impacts across a broad region. So administratively for us, as far as reviewing an application, processing forms, 2As, 2Bs, staff would prefer that a CAP application includes all the locations from which wells will be drilled that would produce CAP minerals. So kind of include everything in the CAP and everything else is excluded. So in this example, with this OGDP, it is a little bit, I would say, frustrating for staff in that there's a non-CAP location producing CAP minerals. We've got two considerations here for surface impacts, which is the primary source of emissions. Emissions don't really happen downhole, they happen at the surface. So these are emissions that are happening at a surface outside the CAP from mineral development that could be potentially reported from inside the CAP. So for staff's perspective, we would, I guess, prefer that going forward, CAPs include everything, all the locations for all the wells that would develop CAP minerals, and for any wells or locations that are outside the CAP or producing minerals outside the CAP, those are excluded from the CAP. It might seem like a minor nuance, but administratively and for us to process forms and then for eventual Form 7 reporting in the future, it would certainly simplify the process if there's clear CAP minerals and CAP locations, and then non-CAP minerals and non-CAP locations.
Thank you, Ms. Trask. This is all, kind of new and novel. We only had a couple of CAPs so far, so I think the discussion is worth having. Perhaps what we should do is, we could even, have kind of a little work session at some point about CAPs and allow the commissioners and the director and some of the operators to, have discussions about pros and cons on how to develop up those sorts of things. I do want to get to a vote on the merits of the application here. And this discussion is, I think I'm hearing from commissioners, while there's a preference that this would have been from some commissioners a part of the CAP, all in, the location is approvable. So unless folks want to keep talking, I would encourage a motion on the particularities of the OGDP that's before us.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to move approval of this OGDP.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there further deliberation or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. So, I might provide direction, or we might just set up a time when we can talk further about CAPs. I think it's the discussion's helpful. And we're all, looking, I think all, when I say we all, that's our operators and our commission and our staff are all wanting to, make use of the comprehensive area plan in the most efficient fashion. I liked what I heard from you, Ms. Trask. That seemed logical. So maybe we can try to set something up and invite, some of our operator stakeholders, into the room as well. Or you could even do that yourself, Ms. Trask. I'm building this thought as I move forward with it.
Chair, I'm happy to initiate the conversation with industry in general, with specific applicants, and certainly with the commissioners. I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, let's just circle back afterward on that thought. Anything further from commissioners at this point? I believe we have concluded the items on our agenda for today, which indicates we need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Cross, second by Commissioner Ackerman to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? We're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.